Now, as we're all aware, and all the legislation has now been passed, the providers will be assessed against the new aged care quality standards from the 1st of July 2019. Just a bit of before that happens, of course, and Andrew mentioned that the Aged Care Quality Agency will no longer exist from the 1st of January of 2019, and we will become the Aged Care Safety and Quality Commission, where we will be working with the Aged Care Complaints Commission, and we have a new commissioner who has just been appointed and is actually visiting our office this morning. So we missed meeting her, but that's okay. And then in the following year, the compliance section of the department will also come on board that commission. So I guess the face and the focus of aged care regulation is going to change significantly, and again, part of that is in relation and in response to the Royal Commission, which is commencing and which Andrew mentioned. So with that broader context, what we'll be talking today is looking at the new set of aged care quality standards, what they are, a brief overview, and also information about the guidance materials that will support you as providers to look at your service delivery and how you can demonstrate that your processes are aligned and meet the new standards. We'll also talk a little bit about what is new and then look at what support there is for the sector during the transition. So, why do we need a new set of quality standards? So these were developed by the Department of Health, and they are really in response to a lot of feedback around the aged care sector, and the whole focus of the new standards is to focus on outcomes for consumers rather than provider systems and processes. So the aim is to make it easier for consumers, their families, carers and representatives to understand what they can expect from a service, and to also make regulation simpler for providers working across multiple aged care services and encourage innovation, excellence and continuous improvement. So just a show of hands, how many of you just have CHSP funding and no other aged care funding? Yeah. How many of you have CHSP and home care package? Yeah, and how many of you also have residential or a combination? Yeah, okay, so just from that show of hands, it's very clear that this process is of bringing in all those programs that have separate and different standards under the one quality framework is the purpose of to simplify and to really bring the focus back onto the consumer. So the new standards will replace the accreditation standards for residential care, the current home care standards that are used by CHSP and home care package providers, the transition care standards for those providing transition care, as well as the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Flexible Aged Care Program. So all of those programs will be covered under the one standard. So aged care providers will continue to be assessed against their current applicable standards until the 30th of June 2019, and then we will be working with service providers, consumers and other key stakeholders on guidance material, consumer resources and an education strategy to support the transition to the new standards. So we'll talk a bit more about that later in the presentation. So what do the new standards look like? They play a key role in setting out the core expectations for quality and safety. Most importantly, the standards emphasise the role of the consumer in the delivery of their care and services and the outcomes that they experience. Just as is the case now, each individual standard should not be read or applied in isolation. So we have 8 standards, and the application of the standards is dependent on the service type and the service delivery type. And we'll talk a little bit more about which ones are applicable to the different service types in CHSP a bit later. So the standards are structured with a consumer outcome for each standard, an organisational statement, and then a range of requirements. So remember that the number that apply to the service depends on the service type and the service delivery context. So the consumer outcome is written as an I statement. These statements provide the overarching principles and relate to the consumer experience for outcome in relation to the standard, and there are 8 of those. The organisation statement provides clarity of the higher level organisational context that the requirements contribute to achieving, and there are 8 of these. And then the requirements are the specific outcome statements that the service will demonstrate performance against during a quality review or an accreditation assessment. There are 42 of these. So where a standard applies, the organisation will need to meet the consumer outcome, the organisation statement, by demonstrating performance or outcomes at the requirement level. And each standards requirements should be applied in a proportionate manner that reflects the type and scope of service provided by the organisation. So we'll just briefly, I'm not going to spend too much time going through each standard in detail because I think that's something that you can look at in your own time and within your organisation and through accessing the guidance material on our website, and there's also further education and resources for you. But I will go through the first standard because that's really a key standard and forms the basis of all the other standards. And I think the key for these standards is being able to demonstrate systems that are flexible in being able to respond to individual consumer needs. So the first standard relates to consumer dignity and choice, and it reflects 6 important concepts: dignity and respect, identity, culture and diversity, choice, dignity of risk, information and personal privacy. And they're each of the 6 requirements for this standard which you'll need to demonstrate how your organisation meets those. And all service providers will need to demonstrate how they meet standard 1. Standard 2 is looking at ongoing assessment and care planning with consumers. This standard is about how your assessment and care planning informs the delivery of safe and quality care and services in accordance with the needs, goals and preferences of the consumer, and mitigates the risk of adverse outcomes for consumers. And there are 5 requirements to this standard. It's also linked to Standard 3, which is focused more on the clinical and personal care. So if you are a provider that provides personal care or nursing and allied health services, you'll need to demonstrate your performance against Standards 2 and 3. If you're a provider who provides social support, respite, transport services, you will just be looking at Standard 2. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Assessment and planning informs the delivery of safe and quality care And I think this is also where we pick up on the wellness and reablement approach that we've been talking about with Andrew earlier. So your whole assessment process needs to demonstrate and incorporate that aspect of the wellness and reablement. And I think this is also where the links with the RAS assessment and then the need and the requirement to also undertake a service level assessment for clients will assist you to really be able to meet their individual and specific needs. Okay, so there needs to then also be a plan developed for each care recipient, and then a process for responding to changes in care recipients or consumers' needs as part of your review process. Are there any questions? Or actually, we'll keep questions till the end. Sorry. Yep, yeah. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to stay and talk to people through lunch because we are running a bit short on time. So standard 3 is the standard that looks at personal and clinical care. This standard is about the delivery of safe, effective and quality personal and clinical care as a basic consumer and community expectation. It sets out the requirements that underpin the delivery of consumer-centred care, and this applies to all services delivering personal care such as showering, toileting, assistance with meals and clinical care. And there are 7 requirements for this standard, which again I will leave you to look at when you go through your guidance materials. Standard 4 is a standard about services and supports for daily living. This standard requires organisations to provide services and supports for daily living in a way that enhances consumers' quality of life and well-being. Again, as part of the comprehensive assessment and care planning, the organisation should identify the services and supports required to help the consumer continue to have a meaningful life. And this refers to those services such as domestic assistance, cleaning, laundry, gardening, maintenance services, food services including meals, food, advice, delivery and preparation, and services that encourage and support consumers to engage in social activity and to participate in a wide range of interests and activities of them. So now some organisations may not actually deliver the personal care and clinical care for a care recipient, but they may be providing some of these other services. So this standard really refers to the ones that provide, to the services that provide the supports for daily living. Standard 5 talks about the organisation's service environment. This standard applies to the physical environment that the organisation provides for residential care, respite care and day therapy centres. Does not apply to home care services where the environment is the consumer's home, or extend to all environments that consumers might visit, such as bowling clubs or libraries. So for a lot of you, this standard won't apply if you're just providing services in people's homes. However, standard 6 is a key standard, and again, this picks up from standard 1, the emphasis on consumer involvement and the focus on the consumer's individual needs. So at the moment in the home care standards, we've got one expected outcome that relates to complaints and feedback. In the new standards, we've got a whole standard that focuses on feedback and complaints. And this is really about organisations having a complaints resolution system that is accessible, confidential, prompt and fair, and it must support all consumers to be able to make a complaint or give feedback. It must also include a process for open disclosure in relation to open communication and transparent processes when things go wrong. So it really draws on the key elements of effective complaints management, and there is additional information for you in the guidance material and links to resources about effective complaints management. So it also emphasises the fact that some consumers will face particular and additional barriers to providing feedback and making complaints. So they may have cognitive or communication difficulties, language or cultural barriers, or the nature of the complaint may be particularly sensitive or private. So organisations are really expected to support all consumers to be able to make complaints. Standard 7 now starts to focus on the organisational and management systems that were primarily looked at under Standard 1 in the current home care standards. So this really looks at the organisation having a skilled and qualified workforce that's sufficient to deliver and manage safe and quality care and services. An effective human resource system supports the competency of an organisation's workforce and the delivery of safe, respectful and quality care and standards of care and services. So there are 4 key concepts. There's sufficiency of the workforce, so do you have enough staff to provide services? The attributes, attitude and performance of the workforce, how the organisation supports the workforce, and what sort of assessment and monitoring and review processes you have of the workforce to ensure that they're able to respond to changing needs. And the last standard looks at organisational governance. So this is really about the provision of oversight and accountability of an organisation's work. And I think a lot of the home care providers are already very familiar with reviews against these outcomes. People who are working primarily in residential aged care, this is a whole new ballgame. They've never had to have been reviewed against these management processes. So this is really looking at and being aware, of course, that different organisations have different corporate structures and governing bodies, and recognising that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for effective governance. But the key concepts around this standard are around partnering with consumers, promoting the right culture, organisation-wide systems for safety and quality, and this incorporates your information management, your continuous improvement, your finance, your workforce, your regulatory compliance, risk management, including such high impact risks such as abuse and neglect, supporting consumers, feedback and complaints, and clinical governance where that is appropriate and required. So that's sort of the standards in a nutshell. And as I have said, the Quality Agency has worked with the industry in developing guidance materials for each of the standards. So has anyone had the opportunity to have a look at the guidance materials on our website? Yeah, how do they assist you, or do you think they will be of assistance to you in making the transition to the new standards? We've got some nods there. Yeah. Look, I think, as I said, a lot of the way that community services work are already using the concepts and the processes that the new standards are talking about. So your challenge will be able to demonstrate to how that information to the surveyors in the quality review. So the guidance material for each standard talk about the intent of each requirement, supporting strategies, reflective questions and examples of evidence. And I think the reflective questions and the examples of evidence are probably going to be the most useful things for you to start looking at. So, in all of this, what are the key changes? What's really new in relation to what's happening in aged care? And I think, I can't say it often enough, it's the stronger focus on evaluation and consumer outcome. We are really wanting very much a much stronger focus on consumers. Concomitant with that, we are also looking very much more at risk. And I think some of the regulatory failures in aged care in the last sort of couple of years has really heightened everyone's awareness on the need to identify consumers who are vulnerable, who are high risk, and really making sure that we are confident that you as providers have got processes to meet those consumers' needs. Looking very much at that. And that will also reflect in our methodology of when we come out and assess your performance against the standards of how we select consumers, how we do our sampling of files to look at. The other area there is open disclosure. So where things do go wrong, that there is a process around providing information about the issues that have occurred. Best practice in personal and clinical care, and really looking at and ensuring that where personal care and clinical care are provided, that is evidence-based care, that there is evidence to support your practices to show that it is clearly good practice. It's not just the way that we've been doing things for the last 20 years because it's always worked in the past. And the other key change there is a much stronger focus on governance and a focus on a range of specific requirements for organisations in relation to governance processes. So, we might skip that one. Just in terms of support for the sector during the transition, have any of you attended any of the other education sessions that the agency has provided around the new standards? Yes?
We had one at our organisation. They actually came and we had other providers coming in.
Yeah. So over the last probably couple of months, we've had education officers who've gone the length and breadth of Victoria and Tasmania to provide education. And I think the feedback has been that they are very pleased that we actually came to them, that we didn't expect everyone to come into the city. So that process will be continuing. And if you look at our website, there will be more information about additional education and resources for providers. There are also resources being developed for consumers, because consumers, of course, will need to have an understanding of what this new process is all about, because they will be centrally involved. Some of you may be aware of the consumer experience survey that is being used in residential care, or has been used for probably the last 12 months, where we have a standardised set of questions that we ask a random sample of all care recipients in residential aged care. We're in the process of developing a consumer experience survey for home care consumers. So that is current. I think there's a bit of a trial of the process or the survey being conducted at the moment. I don't think a decision has been made yet as to how it will be administered, given the number of clients that some of you have. It's not going to be able to be done on the day of the quality review, but there will be a process to get that consumer feedback in a more systematic way than probably we've been able to do in the past. So that's probably... the other thing is that we will be having some better practice seminars I think they're in February, and their focus will also be on the new standards. So that'll be another opportunity for you to get more information. So I guess some steps for you to start considering to assist you in preparing for the process of having new standards to work with. First of all, you really need to review the new standards, the guidance materials and any other education material to understand your obligations. Consider your organisation's governance systems, policies and practices in the context of the new standards, and then undertake a self-assessment against the new standards. We're really encouraging people not to try and map the old standards against the new standards, because that's not the intention of the process. What we really want you to do is to look at your current processes, practices, policies and procedures, and how they actually map against the new standards, where there may be gaps, where there may be additional work that you need to do, working through that through a self-assessment process and your continuous improvement processes. We will have a self-assessment tool on our website for providers to use that should be available shortly, so keep your eye on our website. And then of course there will be work to do to supporting your staff, to educate your staff to understand the requirements of the new standards, and then your consumers and their families to understand what the changes mean for them. Okay, that's all we have today, so thank you. And if there are any questions, please come and chat to me in the lunch break. Thank you.